CrossFit is infinitely scalable. But what does that even mean? We discuss next.
If there was one thing the world was asking for, it was for one more podcast about CrossFit. Well, here we are anyways. This is the Silverback Media podcast, where we share the stories of the everyday CrossFitter, so that more people are encouraged and empowered to try it themselves. Here's your host, an everyday CrossFitter, Marco Mejia.
What is happening, Silverback Media crew? Happy Friday. My name is Marco Mejia. I'm your host here on the Silverback Media podcast. I'm a CrossFit Level 2 coach in Phoenix, Arizona. And this week on the show is just me. It's episode 25. Thought we'd do something a little bit different. So I'm going to be talking to you about a specific topic today. And then at the end, we're also going to go over some Q&A. Recently, I posted on my Instagram or on the Instagram page at Silverback Media. Go follow if you're not yet. I posted on there, if you guys had any questions for me, anything you'd want me to cover, CrossFit, non-CrossFit, whatever, I put that out there. You guys sent in some great questions. So we're going to hit those at the end. So make sure you stick around for that. Now, before we get into the topic for today, whatever platform you're listening on, if you can hear me right now, make sure you're following or subscribed. So whether you're on Apple, whether you're on Spotify, or whether you're watching me on YouTube, hello. Go ahead, follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, or like I ask you to do, just, why not? Go ahead, do it on all three, right? Go hit all three of them. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. That helps the show grow, helps me out, helps spread this message out to more people. And now let's get into the topic at hand. The idea for this actually came from feedback from a listener who actually doesn't do CrossFit, but loves the stories, loves hearing people's backgrounds and how they can apply it to their own life. So the feedback was that some of the terms that we use that are very common for us that have done CrossFit or that do CrossFit, for someone that doesn't do CrossFit, they just aren't quite understanding what exactly it is that we're talking about, right? And after hearing enough of these stories, right, you start to kind of pick up on some of the context, but for someone that's not involved in CrossFit, not in their day-to-day, it's just one of those things that some of these terms can go over their head. So the feedback was, hey, it'd be great to take some of those terms and unpack them. So that way, someone that doesn't do CrossFit, they hear this phrase that's used a lot and they can understand what that truly means in context if they were to step into a CrossFit gym for the first time. So the one that I wanted to go over today, which I think is a very, very big benefit of CrossFit. But again, it's one of those where you hear the term, you may just not understand, like, what does that even mean, right? Is the phrase that CrossFit is infinitely scalable. Now, for anybody that's been doing CrossFit, has done CrossFit, we understand what that means and how that applies within the context of a workout or over the course of a lifetime of doing CrossFit. So what I want to do is break that down in terms of, one, my perspective on it, but I'm also going to be using the level 1 and level 2 CrossFit handbooks. So I'm going to put links to both of those in the show notes. That way you guys can go take a look at those or bookmark them to flip through them later. Great reads. Those are kind of the, if you want to call it the foundational documents of the CrossFit methodology, right? Along with other journal articles and things like that have been published over the course of, the 20 plus years that CrossFit's been around. But these are the two resources that I'm going to primarily be using as we go through this discussion, along with my own perspective kind of mixed in there. So what I want to do first is lay out some terms that we're going to go through, and I'm going to try to not go too far rabbit hole in the weeds on these, right? But there are terms that I feel that are kind of foundational to explain why scaling is beneficial, right? So there's 4 main terms that I'm going to go over before we even kind of touch the topic of scaling, but going through these now, once we get to scaling, it's going to help it make a lot more sense, right? So first is just going to be defining CrossFit. Next is the term fitness. Third is the term stimulus. Fourth is the term intensity. And then once we define those, then we'll get into the actual topic at hand of scaling and what we mean when we say that CrossFit is infinitely scalable and why that's relevant. So first one, let's define CrossFit. The as written definition, CrossFit is constantly varied functional movements executed at a high intensity. At its bare bones, that's what CrossFit is. Each of those individual pieces has a bunch of other meaning and context underneath it that we're not going to go into today. But there's one piece in there that I do want to dive into, and it's actually not necessarily within the definition, but I just wanted to call it out because it is the first line of text written in the level 1 handbook, right? Which that level 1 course, that's what people need to pass in order to go coach in a CrossFit affiliate. So this being the first line in that handbook can tell you kind of the importance behind it, right? The very first line in the level 1 handbook says, the aim of CrossFit is to forge broad, general, and inclusive fitness. I'm going to say it again in case you missed it. The aim of CrossFit is to forge broad, general, and inclusive fitness. The main thing that I want to hit on there is the inclusive part, because that's where scaling is going to really come into play. And what that means in terms of how I'm interpreting it is that it's like, it's a common theme that we talk about a lot on these episodes, right? Whether it's me saying it or one of the guests that I've had on. If you're willing to walk in the door, we want you in there. We will find a way for you to get the benefit of the workout for that day and be able to make it a lifetime of fitness, right? That's what we mean by inclusive. Hopefully that puts some things into perspective if you're on the fence of like, oh man, CrossFit is the CrossFit Games and look at all the crazy stuff they're doing and I can't do that. Guess what? Here's kind of from the methodology perspective. We want inclusive fitness. We want you to come in and we'll find a way to do it for you. And that's where scaling comes into play. We're going to get there. Okay. So why is the definition of CrossFit relevant as well? Just at its bare bones, right? That's what we're after. We're after that as a goal in terms of the goalpost of what we're shooting for. And that's kind of the aim that we're going to base the rest of this conversation around. Next is we're going to define the term fitness. Now, you may sit there and think like, define fitness. Well, that's kind of weird. Well, up until CrossFit came around, there hadn't really been a clear quantitative definition of the term fitness, even with all the other forms of exercise and programs and things like that that had been around before CrossFit really came up and was popularized and shown to drive results. There wasn't really any other methodology that you could say, hey, how do you define fitness? They'd be like, well, you're fit. And it's like, okay, but what does that mean? So that's one of the kind of revolutionary things within the industry that CrossFit did was put a definition to fitness. And since we have it defined, that means we can measure it across time to understand, is it improving, right? Which is kind of important, right? Especially for someone like me who's a numbers nerd. Hey, that's kind of a cool thing to have. The way we define fitness within CrossFit is work capacity across broad, time, and modal domains. Basically, what that means is, are you able to do more work across different types of movements and across different ranges of time? Are you able to lift more weight? Are you able to run a mile faster? Are you able to run a 5K faster? Are you able to do different types of gymnastics movements, right? And it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but is it improving? That is what we're searching for in terms of fitness. And the reason that's relevant is because that's how we can actually quantify and see, are you getting fitter over the course of your time within this methodology? And that's how we define it. That's how we can measure that. Now, the way that we start working towards improving that fitness is through the individual workouts of the day, right? The WODs, as we call them in the CrossFit gym. So when you show up to class, when you go to a CrossFit gym, there's a workout of the day. And each workout is going to have a specific, what's called the stimulus. And the stimulus for any given workout is the intended purpose or the intended target of that specific workout to improve an athlete's fitness, right? Which is what we just defined, right? So each workout is going to have a specific purpose that's going to say, okay, this purpose is going to be a piece of the puzzle in terms of how we improve your fitness from an athlete perspective over the course of the long haul. And that stimulus is important. That's what the coaches are explaining at the whiteboard when they're kind of going through what the workout's going to look like. If it's a 4-time workout, so you have a certain amount of work to get done in a specific amount of time. Hey, I want you to choose a weight on whatever exercise, or choose a gymnastics modification, or choose a distance of running, for example, that allows you to get things done within X amount of time. That X amount of time, it's not arbitrary. It's there because that's going to elicit an adaptation and drive you towards that stimulus, which will get you fitter and ultimately lead us towards that goalpost we were talking about of improving fitness over the course of the long haul. So that's why that stimulus piece is really important. And why that's relevant is because that allows for different people and different backgrounds and different athletic experiences to all be in the same class setting together and each be able to get their own experience. So one of the examples that was actually used when I did my level 1, and it's the one that kind of like really stuck with me in terms of making this example like really set in, was if we take the workout Fran, right? Classic benchmark workout that we use, which is 21 thrusters, which a thruster, you take a barbell, you have it in the front rack position, you do a full front squat. And as you come out of that front squat, you press it overhead, all in one fluid movement. That's 1 rep. So 21 thrusters, 21 chin over the bar pull-ups, 15 thrusters, 15 pull-ups, 9 thrusters, 9 pull-ups. That workout has a very specific stimulus to it. And for those of you that have done it, you know what that is. It's going to be uncomfortable. Okay. But that's not the point. The reason why I bring up the example of Fran is because let's say and this was the example that was brought up in my level 1. If that instructor was in a class and so was, somebody's grandma who had never touched a weight before, never set foot in a gym before, was also in that class, And also, for whatever reason, Tia Claire Toomey walks in and she's in that class as well, which, if you don't know who Tia Claire Toomey is, multi-time CrossFit Games champion, the most dominant CrossFit Games athlete that has been. She's unbelievable. So you've got Tia, you've got that CrossFit instructor, and you've got somebody's grandma that's never set foot in a gym before. If they all walk in and Fran is programmed for the day, there is a way to modify all of those movements and all of those weights to make sure that each one of them hits that intended stimulus. And that could mean for the grandma, that means we're going to probably lower the weight. We're going to change the pull-up movement to something that the grandma can handle. The level 1 instructor may be able to do it just plain as written or RX. And Tia might have to do, something crazy like chest to bar pull-ups and 135 pound thrusters, whatever, something harder to make it equal from a stimulus perspective for her, right? And that's where scaling starts to come into play, but that's because of the fact that we understand and know what the stimulus of that workout is supposed to be. Now, the stimulus of any given workout is really there to make sure that we are getting the appropriate amount of intensity. Now, intensity is probably a word when you hear CrossFit is pretty closely associated with it, right? But there's a little bit of a misconception, especially on social media, the gram, the interwebs, whatever you want to call it, about CrossFit and intensity. The misconception there is that CrossFit is max intensity all the time. You're just like burning it to the ground every day, every time, leaving in a puddle of blood and sweat, which is, it's not true. Okay. Plain and simple. Now I'm going to explain to you why it's not true. Okay. We do want intensity. And the way that we define intensity from the level 1, intensity is defined as power, and power is defined as the time rate of doing work. One of the pieces that's in there in terms of relevancy for why intensity is important is because in the level 1, it says intensity is the independent variable most commonly associated with maximizing the rate of return of favorable adaptation to exercise. Okay, now what that means, and I'm going to break it down and I'll just give you an example, right? Let's say you go out and you run a mile and it takes you 10 minutes. Okay, cool. Well, through intensity or through modulating intensity or modifying intensity through a varied program, aka CrossFit, let's say 3 months later, you come back and you run that mile again, and now you ran it in 8 minutes. Based off of the definitions that we're using here, you were able to apply more power while doing that mile, which increased the intensity, which improved your fitness, in this case, by 2 minutes on a mile run. So when we're looking for intensity, it's not just burn it into the ground. It is an actual measurable variable that we can use that is based off of the stimulus for that day. And now I'm going to give you a really, really important nugget that I really need you to hear in terms of why intensity is extremely relevant. And then this is going to help play into our scaling conversation, which is the concept of relative intensity. Back to that misconception we were talking about, that CrossFit is, viewed online as max intensity all the time, burn it to the ground, pedal to the metal, right? What we're actually after is relative intensity, relative to the stimulus of that workout for that day, but also relative to your needs for that day. And what I mean by that is, if you got 4 hours of sleep the night before, if I'm the coach in the class, I don't want you to come in and try to burn it to the ground, right? You've got other stuff in your day that you need to be doing. The last thing I need you doing is using the last little shreds of energy because you had a rough night of sleep for whatever reason, right? Maybe you were sick. Maybe you had a kid that was up all night. Maybe you had a late night of work because you were, you had a deadline for a project that you had to hit. There's not many examples that you're going to get me to say that it's a bad idea for someone to go to class in some way, shape, or form. But that's where relative intensity comes into play. If you're coming into class and you're on 4 hours of sleep, I don't want you to push the pedal to the metal. I want you to modify and scale, which we'll talk about next, what we need to, whether it's the weight of a given movement, whether it's the actual movement that you're doing, let's modify that. Modify what we need to, so that way you can find the stimulus relative to what you're able to give that day in terms of effort and intensity. If you only slept 4 hours, you're probably not able to give that much intensity. That's okay. I want you to give relative to what you have and what you're capable of for that day. And then the next night, maybe you get a better night of sleep. You come back the next day, you've got a little bit more to give. Cool. Let's give the intensity then. But that level of intensity can fluctuate based off of what you have going on outside of the gym. That's where intensity really comes into play, because intensity allows us to push ourselves to achieve that stimulus And by achieving that stimulus on any given day, well, now that gives us a chance to improve our fitness over the course of time. And there's one other piece that I want to throw in there about intensity. And this is something that does come, again, from our level 1. It's also really, really harped on in the level 2 as well. And it's the coaching charter of CrossFit, right? What we learn and what we're taught and trained on as CrossFit coaches is that there's kind of a 3-step process that we want to build up a new athlete towards before they really start pushing the intensity. And that 3-step process, this charter, is mechanics, consistency, and then intensity. What that means is that mechanics first, right? So if we take a barbell movement, let's take a power clean. If somebody walks in and has never done a power clean before, never touched a barbell in their life, the last thing I want them to do is say, cool, slap some weight on and let's go ahead and start throwing around 60 reps for time with, half-mile runs in between for rounds. That would be, 1, irresponsible, 2, unsafe, right, for that athlete. And it's just going to lead to a horrible experience. And worst case scenario, that person's going to injure themselves. So the first thing I want to do is establish the proper mechanics with a new athlete relative to their background, right? So if somebody comes in with a bit of a, background in the gym or whatever, I still want to know that they have good mechanics. I need them to demonstrate to me that they can do the movement properly. But especially for a new person that doesn't have experience with these movements, the terminology, whatever the case is, I really need to drill with them what proper mechanics look like. 1, above all else, to make sure that the person can move safely, plain and simple, right? If the person can't move safely, we need to stay there and work on the mechanics and continue to do drills and progressions to show that they can exhibit the proper form with these different movements, okay? Once we've got the proper mechanics established, then I'm looking for as a coach, I'm looking for consistency. What that means is that mechanics is basically you can do, again, using the power clean example, you can do 1 rep of a power clean really, really well with, maybe an empty barbell or a PVC pipe. Now, consistency means you can give me that same form over and over and over and over and over again, even when fatigue starts to set in at that lighter weight, again, whether that's an empty barbell or a PVC pipe. That's where consistency comes into play, is the repeatability and essentially, that movement starting to become quote unquote muscle memory for that athlete. Once that athlete displays that level of consistency, now we can start to add in the intensity, right? The intensity only comes after the athlete has displayed the ability to do the movement correctly and to be able to do the movement correctly over and over and over again. So that way I, as a coach, but also in the best interest of that athlete, know that we can put them in a setting that it introduces some intensity, whether that's being able to complete the movement faster or add load in the case of a power clean, right? Add weight to a barbell. They've shown that they can do those things consistently. So that way we feel safe that they will be able to get into a setting with intensity and be able to move safely and move efficiently and effectively. That all kind of cascades back up, right? If they're able to do that, they're able to apply intensity, they can get the stimulus, which increases their fitness, which, hooray, CrossFit. Okay, now that we've kind of set that whole stage, this is where we can start to really get into the scaling conversation, because it allows us, scaling is what's going to be able to allow us to apply intensity relative to where that person's skill level is on that given day or in their quote unquote CrossFit journey. I want to kind of give my own definition of scaling first, right? Scaling is the intentional modification of an exercise or of the weight used for an exercise that allows an athlete to successfully achieve the stimulus of that workout. Now, I want to get something, I got to get this off my chest, okay? Scaling does not mean easier. Scaling does not mean less than. Scaling does not mean not as hard. Scaling means different. When you walk into a CrossFit affiliate, there is a workout written on the board. It's got time domains, it's got exercises, it's got weights for those exercises, it's got a number of reps to do for each exercise. If you do anything within the workout based off of what you need to do and where you are in your journey, if you do anything different from what's exactly written on the board, it's scaling. And the reason I say that, and the reason that you can kind of hear some tension in my voice when I say this, is because that also means if you choose to make the movement harder, let's say you go heavier than the weights listed on the board. Let's say you do, there's a gymnastics movement and it's, chest to bar pull-ups, and you decide, well, I'm going to do bar muscle ups. That's still scaling. You're not doing what's written on the board, and that's okay. That's not a judgment. Like, it's only a judgment if we decide to put a judgment on it, right? Scaling is a matter of fact. You didn't do exactly what's written, and that's totally cool. If that's what you need as an athlete to achieve the stimulus of that workout, do what you got to do. But remember that as we kind of get into the topic of scaling here, it's not judgment based. It's not someone's better than you, someone's worse than you, whatever. It's just, did you do what's written on the board? No, you scaled. That's okay. That is what it is, right? Okay, sorry, rant over. Oof. Goodness gracious. Let's get back to the other stuff. Okay, so scaling, right? Intentional modification of an exercise, weight use, blah, blah, blah. Why is scaling important? I'm going to read you this kind of little section here, and this comes straight out of the level 2 handbook, which will also be linked in the show notes. Okay. In the level 2 handbook, it says scaling workouts is a major part of achieving success within the CrossFit program. If a workout is scaled properly, it will create a mastery experience for an athlete. A mastery experience is an accomplishment, and consistent accomplishments build confidence toward pursuing further goals. If you do not scale effectively for your athletes, if, for instance, the workout or movements are too difficult, they may become frustrated and unmotivated, and results will cease. If you miss that, you need to just rewind like 30 seconds or however long it took me to read that and listen to that again. In terms of within the CrossFit methodology, within our kind of founding paperwork, if you want to call it that, right? That phrase that encapsulates the importance of scaling within CrossFit and that, by the way, that goes for anybody involved within CrossFit. That is why my perspective is that, especially if you're new to CrossFit, if you're starting brand new, that is the importance of being in a CrossFit affiliate. If you've been, in CrossFit for a while and you're going to work out on your own from your home gym or whatever the case is, cool, that makes a little bit more sense. You may be comfortable with the movements, whatever. Okay. If you're brand new to CrossFit, I will highly, highly encourage you to go into a CrossFit gym, to go into a CrossFit affiliate and sign up there, because that's where the coaches are trained on everything that we've just talked about in terms of why scaling is important, how to properly scale, how to come up with scales, right? How to come up with modifications for you that help you achieve that stimulus. That is going to be your best bet to set yourself up to get those mastery experiences early on, because that will give you that sense of belief that, wow, I'm actually capable of doing this. Sorry, I'm going to kind of side quest and rant again a little bit. For a lot of people, CrossFit can be at face value a little bit intimidating. And I mean, if you're hearing me and you've heard some of the stories that we've had on this podcast so far in the past, that's kind of what I'm trying to help overcome with the stories of the everyday people that are doing this, is that it's like, it doesn't need to be intimidating. It's difficult, it's challenging, but it's going to be tailored to your journey. And that's where that level of intimidation, I want to bring that down. All that aside, if you're intimidated and you finally built up the courage to say, okay, all right, I'm going to go do it. I'm going to sign up. I'm going to make this thing happen, right? The best thing that you could have happen is that you walk in and someone says, hey, how you doing? Oh, you don't have any experience? Okay, well, here's what the workout is for today. Let's, have you do a couple drills, have you do a couple of exercises. Okay, this is the way that I want you to do this workout. So that way you can get the same benefit as everybody else in class. You can work out at the same time as everybody else in class. You're doing it in your own way, which, by the way, if you look around the class, there's going to be so many different variations of what's going on. You're going to be like, what in the hell's happening? But everybody's doing the same version of the workout, or the same workout, just their own version of it. And that's going to help build you that mastery experience in that first class to be like, wow, that was hard. That was challenging, but I did it. And oh my goodness, somebody was able to tailor it specifically to what I needed. So that way I could actually do it and leave here feeling that sense of belief that I can keep coming back and I can keep making this happen. Like, holy crap, I didn't think that was possible. I thought they were just going to force me to do, what the CrossFit Games people do, right? So that's what we're after. And that's where being in an affiliate is going to be super helpful, because essentially the amount of scales that are going to be open to you are only limited at that point by the creativity of the coach, which having been around a bunch of coaches and having interviewed a bunch of coaches for this podcast, folks, we're pretty creative people. We can come up for a whole bunch of different ways for you to get some fitness. Okay. So if you show up to class, we're going to find some ways. So again, that's where scaling comes into play, because we're going to help make sure that whatever is written on the board, whatever that workout for that given day is, and whatever the stimulus or the intended stimulus is for that day, that we can find a modification that meets you where you are on your journey. Maybe a little bit of an extra challenging push, maybe depends on the day, right? But it's something that you're going to need to challenge yourself and kind of get uncomfortable with it, but that you're going to be capable of doing, and you're going to leave thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't think I could do that, and I did it, and I'm ready to come back tomorrow. Think about that from a even from a business perspective, right? Like take the fitness side of it out for just like 30 seconds with me, right? Just explore the space with me. CrossFit affiliates are small businesses, right? If you walk in there and you're like, hey, I've been thinking about doing this for like 6 months, but and not that you would say this, right? Maybe you're just kind of having this conversation in your head, right? But you're like, hey, I've been thinking about doing this for 6 months, but honestly, I was pretty scared to even try it. And I've been, I had looked you guys up a while ago and I thought about doing it, but I've never worked out before. And I finally got the courage up to come in and try it out. Can I come into class? And the coach or whoever's there says, well, sure. Yeah, here's what the workout is. It's Fran. It's, these, 95-pound or 65-pound thrusters and pull-ups. And here's how many reps we're going to do. And you say, oh, well, I've never done any barbell stuff before. And I don't think I've ever done a pull-up. And the coach is like, well, you're going to do it anyways? Like, what kind of experience would that be for you if that was a response, right? One, if you decided to stick around, you're likely going to be set up for failure in that workout because you're going to be forced to try to do weight that you're not capable of doing because you've never done it before. You've never done a pull-up before. And now essentially quote unquote being forced to do the pull-ups in the workout. Worst case scenario, you hurt yourself on your very first day. And then you walk out thinking like, well, this fitness thing was never really for me anyways. I knew it. I should have never tried this CrossFit crap. Best case scenario, you don't hurt yourself, but you so badly finish after everybody else that you're like embarrassed, right? And we've all had those moments where you just like completely miss on a workout and you're the last one by a lot and you're like, oh boy, now all the eyes are on me. That's probably best case scenarios. You don't hurt yourself, but you finish way far after everybody else. And then someone's going to come up to you afterwards and be like, do you want to sign up for a membership? And you're like, hell no. Why would I do that? I'm going to go home. And not only am I not coming back, but anytime any of my friends ever ask me if they should try CrossFit, I'll be like, well, I tried it this one time and here was what happened to me. So again, that was a long rant to say, like, from a business perspective, right? Within a CrossFit affiliate, we're going to do anything we can to make sure that you have a good experience, that you get a quality workout in, right? And we're not going to make it easy for you, but we're going to make it challenging relative to your skill level. And we want you to come back. Like that's kind of number one, is that we want you to feel comfortable enough that you actually come back and keep working on it, because we know that over the long term, continuing to progress within the CrossFit methodology and continuing to stay training within CrossFit is going to be one of the best things that you can do for your life inside and outside of the gym from a fitness and health and wellness perspective. But I mean, just from my own personal example, right? Just from like a character development perspective. So that's why scaling is important. And when we say it's infinitely scalable, that's what we mean, is that we can scale it to anybody for anything. Now, I did get a couple of questions. So we're going to kind of start to dip into the Q&A a little bit here, because I did get a couple of questions actually that were related to scaling. So I want to hit on those, and I'm actually going to insert a couple of clips from previous episodes of the podcast so you don't just have to listen to me talk about scaling, okay? One of the first questions that I got, and it's actually kind of funny because we've been using the Fran example, is, well, what if I can't do a pull-up? And so I've actually got 3 clips for you that are related to scaling and the benefit of scaling that some of my previous guests have had early on in their CrossFit experience. The first clip that I have for you is from Carly Brennan, way back in episode 2. Oh my goodness, this is 25. Can you believe it? Okay, so this is Carly talking about one of her first experiences and when she realized that scaling was really a big benefit of CrossFit when she started.
One thing that she hit on that I think is really important that I did not mention about like what really made CrossFit stick for me was the scalability. So when I started, like, fun fact, I couldn't do a push-up. Like, literally from the knee, I could do maybe one. I could not do a pull-up, did not know how to kip. I did not know I couldn't do a handstand, maybe against the wall, but certainly not like a freestanding one. And so it was like the ability to just like scale everything. Like there was a scaled movement for every single thing that we do, whether it's barbell work, dumbbell work, like gymnastics, whatever it is. The fact that there was a scaling option was a huge win for me too, because and a huge like selling factor, because if I can't do everything and I'm just like that's discouraging. You're not going to want to come back. The fact that they're like, hey, these are the options, and even in the whiteboard briefing, they're like, if you're not wanting to hang from the rig, here's another option. If you don't want to go too heavy, scale down the reps or scale down the weight or whatever. And there's no shaming. There's no, everybody's encouraged to just be here and move. Like we're all here to like get a good workout in. Period.
That clip is just such a great example that Carly explains, right, in terms of how scaling benefited her when she first started. Now, fast forward, Carly's a level 1 coach out in Hawaii at CrossFit Kailua. And, having worked out with her before in the past and even had a chance to coach her in a couple classes, right? When she's back in Phoenix. I mean, now she's able to do all of those movements, but part of it is because of the fact that when she first started, there were scales and progressions available to her to be able to continue to progress her fitness and have it meet her where she was. Now, this next clip is from Ryan Talley from episode 22, where he actually describes an example of being in a class where there was a gymnastics movement programmed as a part of the workout, right? A relatively standard one, which is toes to bar. And he gives an example of what he was able to see while he was in class with a few different members and how they approach those toes to bar. So let's take a listen to Ryan.
CrossFit meets you where you are, right? Like last week, we had a really cool workout where I can't remember, we were doing a certain amount of rowing. We were doing toes to bar and ground to overhead or shoulder to overhead, something like that. So, and I was kind of looking out across the class and like, you got this one guy who's RX all the way and he's just going to town. Then I can't do toes to bar. So I'm doing kind of a weird, knees as high as I can get them kind of thing. And then I look at another guy who's, scaling it even further than me. But at the end of that workout, all three of us, we've just all three gone like maximum effort. It's infinitely scalable. Anybody who's intimidated or thinks, oh, I can't do that. Like even like my first day with this stupid PVC pipe, like you can scale it, you can start anywhere.
That example right there from Ryan is awesome. And I think what his example really shows is how the stimulus plays into a class setting, right? So he described very quickly what that workout was, right? So we had rowing, we had toes to bar and shoulder to overhead, which is a typical barbell movement. But in terms of how the toes to bar were approached by three different athletes, right? He mentioned there was one, RX athlete, right? So doing the workout just as written. There was Ryan himself doing a variation of a toes to bar, trying to get his knees or his legs up as high as possible. And a third athlete who was in there who wasn't hanging from the rig, but was doing another core exercise from the floor. So three different options, all of them in class together, getting the same benefit out of the workout, but modifying that gymnastics movement to their skill level. And it's funny, he kind of threw in a little piece about the PVC pipe at the end. Go check out Ryan's episode because that is kind of a cool part that he talks about. But that also plays into our next clip we're going to go into, which is with Ash Bennett. So Ash is one of the affiliate owners at CrossFit North Scottsdale, where I coach, and she was a guest way back on episode 5. Her and Sarah Backus, they were actually getting ready to go do a competition. So if anybody, if you follow competitive CrossFit, they were getting ready to go do the First Form Monster Games, which they actually finished second in their division. And Ash talks about her first time being in a CrossFit class where she did some Olympic lifting and got exposed to the barbell. So let's go take a listen to Ash.
So like the structure of the classes here used to be like they had endurance days, barbell days, endurance days, barbell days. Okay. So I'd say like at first I was always only coming to the endurance days. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, that's what like I know and I like. And then I was urged to go to a different type of class. Yeah. And I literally had the PVC pipe the entire class, and I think that's when I was like, but everyone else had a barbell. Yeah. And I'm like, no. This is not cool. Like I want to use a barbell. And Jason Fine, who is the other owner, he was like, well, you're not going to touch a barbell until you show me that you can do the movement. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, there was frustration there and everything, but I was like, I really want to do it. So finally graduated to a barbell, and I think that was kind of the point where I was like, okay, cool.
That is such a cool example back to what we talked about of the mechanics, consistency, intensity component, right? You have a new member who shows up, who's excited, who gets in there, and then you hand them a PVC pipe to practice these movements, right? And now you can go back and listen to the episode with Ash and her athletic background, right? She, grew up playing sports, but comes in and now she's handed a PVC pipe and sees everybody else with barbells. And she's like, hey, what the hell? What gives? I want to do that too. But the owner and the coach at that time really, really sank into the concept of that mechanics, consistency, intensity, and basically said to Ash, okay, and we're summarizing, right? In terms of what they said, what was said, but summarizing said, prove it, right? You need to show me. And the coach was going to work with her to make sure that she could, progress and improve, but you need to prove that you can move well with the PVC pipe. And as Ash said it, right, then she was able to graduate to the barbell. Okay. And I think those three examples, especially when we go back, like the question was, what if I can't do a pull-up, right? Those three examples, while none of them were specific around the pull-ups, they were examples of people walking in early on in their CrossFit journey and finding different ways to scale the options and scale the workout that was programmed for that day to meet them where they were. Specific to the pull-up, just my own perspective on it, right? One, it depends on the stimulus. Two, it depends on, what your current capacity is. But if you're not able to do a pull-up, one of the things that we're going to look at is where is it within the pull-up that you hit the sticking point, and we're going to find a modification that allows you to progress that piece, right? It's going to be individualized to each athlete in terms of what is the biggest hurdle standing in front of your way of being able to achieve a pull-up. And let's see if we can find a variation that addresses that piece head on. So that way you can get closer to achieving that pull-up, right? Next question that came up is, I have an old injury that flares up if I run. What if there's running in a workout? And that's a great piece, or great question. And that is definitely a common thing. And I want to give you two clips here from previous guests that I've had on talking about how they've approached injuries in the past in terms of how they approach going to a CrossFit class. The first clip here is from episode 18 with Dave Fennell. And this is an example of how he approached actually going to a CrossFit class after having shoulder surgery right before the CrossFit Open, actually this year in 2025. So let's go ahead. Let's take a listen to Dave.
The day I had surgery was 25.1, and I was in the gym that night. Like, I walked in with my sling on to see everybody compete, to be a part of the community, to like literally 12 hours after I had surgery. So listen, 25.3 I did. So there was things I couldn't, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I did everything with a dumbbell or kettlebell, one armed. So like, I was in the back corner on 20, you could see me in the videos for our gym. Like, I'm in the back corner in a sling, and I just modified that workout myself. And I sent it to our affiliate owner and was like, hey man, can I do this? And he's like, yeah, looks like it to me. So I did. And I just tied my sling super tight so my arm wouldn't move. And, 2 weeks after surgery, I did 25.3.
That's such a cool clip and such a cool perspective, right? Context here, because he throughout, mentioned 25.2, 25.3. If you haven't done CrossFit before, those are numbers of the workouts in the CrossFit Open, which is basically the worldwide online CrossFit competition that anyone in CrossFit can join and be a part of. It is actually technically the first step to making it to the CrossFit Games, but it's kind of like an annual measuring stick for anyone that does CrossFit to see like, okay, how has my fitness improved from last year? That's what he mentioned there. And, each of the workouts is based off of whatever year it is, right? So in this case for 2025, it was 25.1, 25.2, 25.3. And for context, 25.3, which he talked about doing in a sling 2 weeks after having shoulder surgery, was a workout that included a lot of shoulder heavy movement. So there was a lot of wall walks, which is a movement where you basically get upside down facing a wall. So on your hands, which you can imagine, one hand, one arm basically being in a sling was going to challenge that. There was a lot of power snatches, which was with a barbell going overhead. But as you can hear Dave mention that he did it all with a dumbbell or a kettlebell, right? But he found ways to scale the movements to what he was capable to give back to that relative intensity component, considering he was 2 weeks removed from having shoulder surgery. And now we've got another great example here. This one's from Courtney Samudio. She was my guest on episode 20, and she actually talked about she has had 2 Achilles tears in the last 12 months. So this is actually us talking about how she's approaching recovering from her most recent Achilles tear, and what that means for her inside of the gym in terms of how she approaches her workout. So let's go listen to Courtney.
I'm okay with saying, once upon a time I was able to do this. I'm not going to do that anymore because, I don't want to spend another 8 weeks in a boot and not be able to drive, right? It never was a question of, do I need to walk away from this? It's just, what is CrossFit going to serve in my life? Is the intent and purpose to be a method for competing? No, it's going to be general health and wellness, community, all of those types of things.
How's the recovery going now? Are you technically cleared?
So we're starting to load the tendon a little bit more. So getting some of those squatting movements back, but jumping, running, the explosive stuff, still really taking a conservative approach there. And I'm not rushing to get back to anything. I mean, if I don't have to do burpees for another month, I'm not mad. if I'm being honest. I'm just being really patient with it. So happy with the movements that I've been able to add back in, with my ability to just even drive to the gym and participate in some capacity in class. I'll take anything over nothing.
And the piece that I think that's really important to take away from what Courtney was just talking about there, right, is that even though you have a pretty, significant injury, right, an Achilles tear is no joke, you can still find a way to modify, scale, whatever you need to within the context of a CrossFit workout to meet you where you are. That's back to that relative intensity component, right? Actually, one of the things that I like to say to athletes when they come in, if they have kind of a nagging injury or something like that, or even if somebody's recovering from something like that, right, and they decide to come into class, I like to tell them, I want you to leave here better than when you came in. So let's use Courtney's example, right? If someone comes in and they're recovering from an Achilles tear and we have, double unders, right, or a jump rope movement, if that's something that, one, they're not medically cleared to do, or even if they are medically cleared to do, but they just don't feel comfortable doing it because they haven't built up the capacity for it, we're going to find another option that gets them that same feel and that same benefit without putting that person at risk of re-aggravating or re-injuring something, right? Especially for, we like to use the term, right, the everyday CrossFitter. It's not worth it some of the times, right? Like if you've got a knee that's bugging you and there's heavy squats programmed for that workout, just take it lighter. It's okay. Like you don't need to force yourself to do it just because you quote unquote should, right? Because you're capable of it. Like if something's bugging you, remember that you're the CrossFit being engaged in CrossFit and improving your fitness through CrossFit is a means to improve the rest of your life outside of the gym. Okay. So I actually want to play one more clip for you that is kind of related to that same topic. I mean, this is actually from Rocky DePalma. She's a CrossFit level 2 coach at CrossFit North Scottsdale. Hey. She was my guest back on episode 15. And she actually talks about an example where she just had a day where she just kind of wasn't feeling it, right? We've all had those days where you just wake up or you're getting ready to go to the gym and you're like, just, man, I don't want to do this right now. And let's go listen to her example and her story of how she approached that and what she ended up doing.
Was not in the best mood yesterday. I'm not going to lie. I coached a class. I was considering staying to work out after, but then I was like, I don't want to. Like, I don't feel good. I'm going to leave. And actually Ashton was like, I think it would be better if you just stayed and like worked out, like sweat a little bit, you'll feel better. And I'm like, okay, but I'm just coming to move. Like, I'm going to move slowly. I'm just going to kind of like phone it in, and had zero intentions of really pushing myself. But I went in and like, once I started moving, I was like, okay, feeling better. I'm going to push a little bit, and I ended up, finishing the workout, finishing better than I had intended in doing. So just the mindset of just like getting in and getting it done, no matter what it takes, yesterday was just a perfect example for me.
That's such a cool example, especially for experienced athletes, right? Folks that are in the bucket of like, okay, I am capable of doing all of the RX movements, whether it's gymnastics, the weights in a weightlifting movement, whatever the case is. And this goes back to the relative intensity concept, right? Some days it's not there. And that's okay. Don't force yourself to do something that your body's not ready for. And that goes to, well, I kind of mentioned for experienced athletes, but that also applies to like, if you're newer in CrossFit and you see other people in class and you're like, oh man, I want to be able to do that. Like I should be able to do that, so on and so forth. Remember that everybody's on their own journey and you need to find the modification on any given day that is going to be most beneficial to you and to where you are in your fitness, not relative or not related to where other people are in their fitness. Everybody's got different backgrounds. Everybody's showing up with a different amount of intensity that they're able to give on that given day. And so you need to make sure that you are prioritizing your own long-term health and fitness over the importance of where your modification for that day falls relative to someone else that you think you should be able to do as much as they can. I like to think about it in terms of like scaling is prioritizing your long-term health over the importance of any single workout, right? So any single workout where you're like, man, my knee's bugging me, but we have those heavy squats today. Well, I'm going to do it anyways because I want to market RX. Well, but is that actually helpful for you in the long term to have just like ignore pain and just power through it anyways. The way I would think about it is by showing up to actually get the workout in, you're kind of already doing a hard thing. Don't compound that with a bad decision to force yourself to do something that your body isn't ready to do. And that applies to experienced athletes. That applies to the newer athlete. Make sure that you're making decisions based off of your long-term health and fitness that'll allow you to keep coming back and keep maintaining your consistency within CrossFit over the long run, because being able to apply that intensity consistently over the long term is what will continue to drive your fitness and get the benefit of living a better and healthier and fitter life over the long term. So I hope that was helpful for you in terms of breaking down what that concept of infinitely scalable really means, or at least from my perspective of what that means, and also from the perspective of the other guests that I've had on the show and their experiences. And now that we've kind of got into that, let's move into some Q&A. I've got a few more questions that some people had, so we're going to try to kind of power through these relatively quickly. So number one, why don't you cold plunge? Okay, sir, or person that asked this question. The main reason why I don't cold plunge is because I don't want to be cold, and that's why I moved to Arizona in the first place. So halfway joking, but like kind of serious. But an honest answer, if I'm being really, really honest, one, I'd never owned a cold plunge. So for me, I had like a makeshift cold plunge that just wasn't worth it to fill up or whatever. So I kind of ditched that. I did cold showers for a long time. You know, part of the reason that I stopped doing those was because if I really stopped and thought about it, the reason I was cold showering was because I wanted to build evidence for myself that I was capable of doing hard things. And over the course of time, what I realized was that going and doing CrossFit was kind of the evidence that I needed. So for me, instead of finding more ways to build more evidence of my capability to do hard things, what I decided to do was to take that time and energy and apply it towards doing the hard things that I was already trying to find proof for myself that I was capable of doing in the first place. So I hope you kind of followed my train of thought there. And you're probably sitting there saying, a cold shower, that takes like 3 minutes. It's like, well, yeah, but there's also the minutes of time where you're like freaking anticipating getting into that cold shower because it's going to be freaking cold. And you've got all the after effect of it. And I used to live in the Midwest. So imagine, it's January and you're in St. Louis and it's -10 with wind chill, and you just did a cold shower and you're not warming back up. And now you've got to go sit at a desk for your corporate job and you can't feel your fingertips. Well, that's no fun, right? So it's not just the time of the cold shower, right? Is kind of my point there. But I guess my main point is, for me, it wasn't something that gave me any real physical benefit. A lot of the benefit that I was getting out of it was on kind of more of the mental side of things. But when I really stopped and thought about it, the benefit that I was getting, I was already actually getting it from other places anyways. So I didn't need to also build proof through cold showering. I could just take that energy and do the hard things that I was trying to build proof for. That being said, that's my approach. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do. If you like to cold plunge and you do all that stuff, hey, power to you. I love that decision for you. But kind of back to what I said, half jokingly, but also half true. That's why I moved somewhere warm. I don't want to be cold. Okay, next question. Why do I always see CrossFitters with so much gear? Do I need all of that? Short answer is no. You don't need, and I'm going to emphasize need, you don't need any of it, right? So when you see people wearing, the gymnastics grips, the knee sleeves, the weight belts, all that stuff, none of it is necessary. And I say that as someone that uses all of those things, right? They can be helpful in terms of applying more power, intensity, things that we talked about before with the way to approach CrossFit workouts, but they shouldn't be used as a crutch or a dependency or to mask poor movement. And I'll give you an example, and I'm going to use a weight belt as the example, right? So the weight belt is something that's a tool that you can use to help brace with more force. So that way you can maintain a tighter core, which allows you to stay more upright through, whether it's barbell movements or whatever the case is, right? So if you think about it when you're squatting, right, you can use a weight belt. You can apply pressure into that weight belt, which helps keep your midsection more rigid, which allows you to be able to then support heavier weight to be able to then do that barbell movement or the squats. The issue with a weight belt is if somebody tries to use it before they have felt what it feels like to properly brace their core without it, right? So a weight belt on its own is not going to keep you necessarily safe or like prevent you from, let's say hurting your lower back, right? Which I think is a misconception that a lot of people may have. If you don't know how to properly brace your core, a weight belt's not going to help that. And actually, I would argue that if you don't know how to properly brace your core and you start using a weight belt, it might make it worse because you might have kind of a false sense of security, right? Now, the flip side of that, if you learn to properly brace your core, so that way you can and develop the core strength to properly brace and to support an appropriate amount of weight through, with proper mechanics through whatever movement it is you're working on, then when you add a weight belt on top of that, now you can really get some benefit out of it, right? But it's because you've put in the work to get the benefit out of not using that belt in the first place. And the same thing goes for gymnastics grips with, grip strength, or knee sleeves with like, your knee health, so on and so forth. The other piece I'll add in on that is if you're someone, and this is something that I try to do on a relatively regular basis, I don't like schedule it or anything, right? It's just kind of by feel. If you're someone that uses that gear on a regular basis, whether it's knee sleeves, belts, whatever the case is, give yourself some times, maybe it's a week at a time, like every few months or whatever the case is, where you don't use any of the gear, or you rotate out which piece of gear you don't use. That's a good reminder for the rest of your body, at least for me. It's a good reminder of like what my body's supposed to be doing without all of that gear on. So that way, when I start using that gear again, then it, feels even better. Kind of helps make sure that I don't become like super, super dependent on any of those. The one piece of gear that I would say you need is thumb tape if you're planning to hook grip a barbell, which you should be hook gripping a barbell. So you need thumb tape. That would be my one. But that's just because I have baby thumbs and I don't want to tear my thumbs. Okay, next question. Tell us about your failures. First off, listener, that's not a question. But joking, that's just me being a smartass. Okay, so this is, well, one, how much time do you have? Two, I'm going to keep this limited to a couple different things. One is a very specific CrossFit example, and the other one I'll kind of zoom out a little bit more. One is an example of, so one of the things that I like to tell people is that CrossFit is safe as long as you don't do dumb stuff. So I'll give you a couple of examples of when I did some dumb stuff and it became not safe. So ironically enough, it was both with the same movement. It was actually working on pistols, which is basically a single-legged squat. And what I did that was not safe, and that was actually really, really dumb. It was actually 2 different times doing pistols without warming up the day after doing another heavy squatting variation. I'd never got anything like quote unquote diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I just tweaked my meniscus. But both times I basically went to try to do these pistol squats with, adding weight to it, and just felt something in my knee like immediately both times, almost exactly 1 year apart from each other. And each one took a long time to recover from. But those are 2 examples, or at least one example, where I did something that was not programmed. I wasn't really thinking about like, hey, your legs are already tired from heavy squats yesterday. You know what's not a good idea? Single leg squats with weight. Like I just didn't think about it, right? And I paid the price for it. I haven't removed pistols necessarily from my program, or from any, it's not like I don't do those anymore, but it's definitely more of like, hey, I'm not going to do them after doing a bunch of heavy squats the day before, right? Just like that little bit of extra thinking on my own part. The other one that I'll kind of zoom out on a little bit more is, and I actually talk about this a little bit in episode 19 with Mike Ward. We actually talk about making sure that CrossFit doesn't become your life, right? And that CrossFit doesn't start to take over your life, because for the vast majority of us, it is the kind of thing, CrossFit is the kind of thing that is there to serve us and serve our lives outside of the gym. So we want to improve our health, we want to improve our fitness and improve our wellness, but the purpose of that is then to go live a better life outside of the gym. And so we talk about that a little bit in episode 19. You definitely go check that out. I highly encourage you do. But I know from my own personal experience, there was definitely a stretch of time where I felt that, where I allowed that to happen and had to course correct pretty dramatically, and I almost paid, close to paying some pretty serious consequences from it. So keep that in mind. CrossFit is a method to improve your health and fitness and wellness. And I love CrossFit, and it's a big part of my life. Hell, I started a whole freaking podcast about it, right? But give yourself that double check and make sure that it is serving your life in the way that you want it to, and it's not taking over your life. Next question. How do you dial in your nutrition? Great question. Nutrition is a big factor within CrossFit. So especially if you don't do CrossFit, right? We call it the theoretical development of an athlete. And it's basically the different layers and ways to, progress through CrossFit to improve, an athlete's performance. And at the very base of it, the foundation of it, what we believe is the most important thing to drive results is a focus on nutrition. So before any sort of training components or exercise components, right, as important as those all are and as focused as we are on those, we believe from a purely a methodology perspective that the foundational piece that will drive the biggest results is a focus on your nutrition. So for me, what I do from a nutrition perspective is I follow the 3 pillars method, which is, I don't want to say popularized, that feels like the wrong term, by E.C. Sinkowski. So E.C. is a former employee at CrossFit. She's a CrossFit level 4 coach and now has her own nutrition company where she, helps people and promotes her method of eating and tracking, right? And the 3 pillars method is based off of 3 factors, right? Haha, 3 pillars. The main one is the 800-gram challenge, which is something that she brought to light and popularized as well, which is eating 800 grams of fruits and vegetables per day by weight. The second pillar is a focus on protein. So it's eating 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight. I probably go a little bit higher, but that's just because it's a more round number and works for my OCD brain. So I'm probably closer to 0.8. And then the third pillar is a focus on calories, which is, it's not a straight calculation or a specific number. It's more tailored to people's needs. But that 3 pillars method and that approach to it is something that I've probably been doing for like 5 or 6 years. And it's the thing that's allowed me the most consistency and flexibility compared to anything else that I've ever done nutritionally, while also fueling my performance. The way I like to think about it is that, like, I want to use the least amount of mental effort possible to keep my nutrition dialed in, because I want to be able to use as much of my mental energy and effort to focus on other things, like bringing you guys awesome content or being able to do awesome interviews with really cool guests. And that's hard to do if I'm constantly thinking about what am I going to be eating? Does this going to fit? Is that going to fit? And so this approach is the way for me that's helped me the most to remove that noise, follow a very simple, very basic plan that has gotten me results and allowed me to stay consistent and can move with me, right? And what I mean by that is, like, I go on vacation. Guess what I can find? Protein, fruits, and vegetables, and pretty well, relatively speaking, stay within my calories. I go out of town for work. Somebody gets sick. It's something that's very flexible and adaptable to whatever I have going on in my life. And that's why I stick with it. If that sounds interesting, if that sounds, compelling, go check EC out. She puts out awesome content on Instagram at Optimize Me Nutrition. And she also has her own podcast called The Consistency Project. And I would highly encourage you, go follow on Instagram, go check out her podcast after you finish this one. Haha. Last question is, are you and Lindsay going to see John Summit in February? We're sorting that out. we're gonna need to figure something out for that. I kind of joked with the person that asked me this question. I kind of joked that I'm going to try to not turn this into a full tirade on music, but there is kind of one cool reason that I wanted to leave this question in here, right? And it's not necessarily specific to this concert. So for those of you, if you don't know who John Summit is, he's one of the, biggest EDM DJs going in kind of in the world right now, right? But the reason that I left this question in here is actually to side quest onto a YouTube video, which is for me the one that kind of really made me appreciate his music a lot, but it's less of a musical reason, right? So if you're interested in this, you can go to YouTube, search John Summit Shiver Behind the Song. It's like a 9-minute video, really cool. But basically what it is, he goes through and this is after the song has already been, released, and it's a huge worldwide hit, right? But he goes through and shows how he actually created the song. So how he actually built the different components of it, whether it was kind of the drum line or the bass or the strings or the vocals or the melodies, and piece it all together. It was so freaking cool. And he's playing these different components and he's showing how he actually thought through it and how he tinkers with it. And he's playing the different components of the song, and you're hearing the song. And if you hear the whole song, right, it's like, it's an unbelievable song, but he's playing these different components and you hear these different pieces of the song and you're like, man, that could be a hit song on its own. Oh, damn, that one that's just the strings and the vocals, that could be a hit song. And then he puts it all together and it's this masterpiece, right? But what it showed for me was the level of detail that it takes to make something truly great is what that opened my eyes to. For me at that time, it was more so around like content creation, right? As I've kind of been trying to make sure that I'm like really keeping the quality high on the content that I'm putting out, mainly on Instagram, but also within the podcast and things like that too. But if you see the level of detail that he goes to in the tinkering to make sure everything just flows and pieces together and builds together to bring you this experience within like a 3-minute song, right? That opened my eyes to like, oh, there's levels to this stuff. And why I think that's important and why I wanted to keep it in here, within CrossFit, we have this phrase of the standard is the standard. And part of that being beneficial is, one, making sure that you're executing to the standard as best you can on any movement that we have, because that's what's going to help us progress our fitness in the best way possible over the long term, right? Kind of back related to all the stuff we've already talked about. But the other piece of it is being in a CrossFit affiliate exposes you to a level of standard that you may not have experienced before. And that may come from seeing, whether it's a coach or another athlete in the gym or another member at your affiliate that moves so exceptionally well. And you're like, oh, I didn't even realize movement like that was possible. And that exposure to that level of virtuosity and mastery is something that can break your kind of mindset of what you're capable of doing and push you to continue to challenge your own limits in terms of what that standard is for you. And so exposing yourself to different layers of people that can elevate the standard for what's possible for you can continue to help you progress over the long term, because it shows you that, to use a horrible Mean Girls reference, right? The limit does not exist in terms of what you're capable of achieving, as so long as you think that it's possible. That's why I wanted to include this question about John Summit, is to give you that little boost and that little reminder that, hey, you can do it if you think it's possible. Sometimes it helps to see somebody else that's capable of doing it too, because then it's that reminder for you that you can do it as well. With that being said, guys, this has been a lot of fun. If you enjoyed this episode, send me a message on Instagram. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment. Let me know if this was helpful for you. Send it to someone who has been thinking about doing CrossFit but doesn't know how they're going to be able to actually work through it. Hopefully the first part of this conversation is really, really helpful for them, gives them some context in terms of how that first experience will go for them because of the benefit and the impact of scaling. So to wrap up here, go follow me on Instagram at Silverback Media. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, remember to hit that follow button. Remember to share this with a friend. Remember to share this episode on social media, on the gram, on the interwebs. If you're watching on YouTube, it's been a pleasure having you here with me. Remember to hit that subscribe button so that way the show and the stories that we're telling can help get out to more people and spread this message and help get more people do CrossFit. Next week, we'll be back with another awesome interview. And until next time, I'm Marco Mejia. This has been the Silverback Media Podcast. Have a great weekend.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing with a friend. To get notified of future episodes, please follow the show on your favorite podcast app so you can continue to hear these stories. For more behind-the-scenes content of everyday CrossFitters, follow on YouTube and Instagram at Silverback Media. Until next time, this has been the Silverback Media Podcast.